Welcome everyone to Chapters Unfolded, where we dive deep chapter by chapter into ideas that can really change how we live and work. And today we are back with episode 6 of our Hyperfocus series.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, me too. We are picking up right where we left off and diving headfirst into chapter 5 of Hyperfocus: How to Work Less and Achieve More.
Love that book.
Yeah, if you've been following along with us, this whole journey is all about unlocking your potential by mastering your attention. But if this is your first time joining us for one of these deep dives, well, buckle up because you are in for a treat.
Absolutely.
So in Chapter 5, the author tackles something that I think we all grapple with, that slippery tendency for our minds to wander. And, it often happens at the worst possible moment, right when we need to be laser focused.
It's like it knows.
Right. And so you might be wondering, well, why does this happen? But more importantly, what can we do about it?
The age-old question.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Get ready.
Okay, so now before we plunge into all the fascinating details of this chapter, just a quick but really crucial request. If you're getting some real value from these deep dives, if you're finding those aha moments, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps us bring these insights to even more curious minds out there.
Yeah, spread the knowledge.
And, if you know someone who you think could really benefit from, understanding their own focus a little better, whether it's a friend, a family member, a colleague, anyone, please share this episode with them. Let's all learn and grow together.
We're all in this together.
Exactly. And we also, we always love hearing from you. So let us know in the comments, what are your biggest distractions? What makes your mind wander? Share your thoughts, share your experiences. We're building a community here of focused learners. And your experiences, they're really invaluable.
We can all learn from each other.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get down to it. Chapter 5, Making Hyperfocus a Habit.
Here we go.
This isn't just about, how to focus. It's about weaving this powerful state of hyperfocus into the very fabric of your daily life. So let's explore, what are the core reasons that our minds wander, and some incredibly practical strategies for keeping them anchored right where we need them.
Sounds good to me.
So, when you were reading the chapter, what really stood out to you is some of the main culprits behind our wandering minds?
Well, I thought it was really interesting how the author broke it down into these distinct categories. It's not just random noise. There are these, specific drivers at play. And, some of the big ones I think are pretty intuitive. You've got stress and boredom.
Right.
When you think about it, it makes sense. Like, if you're feeling overwhelmed or underwhelmed, your mind's going to look for an escape route.
Absolutely. It's like your brain hitting the eject button, like, get me out of here.
Exactly. It wants something more engaging or less threatening. And then there's, the obvious one, your environment. Like, if you're working in a cluttered or distracting workspace, think piles of paper, notifications popping up constantly, colleagues interrupting you every 5 seconds. Like, it's an obstacle course for your focus.
Oh, yeah. It's like they designed it to make you lose your train of thought.
Right. And it's not just about the external chaos either. The chapter really emphasizes the role of, our internal world as well. All those personal concerns that are always simmering in the background.
It's like a constant low hum.
Right. You've got, unfinished tasks nagging at you, worries about your family, financial pressures. All these things are constantly vying for your attention, even if you're not consciously thinking about them.
It's almost like trying to focus on a conversation while, a dozen other conversations are happening around you.
Yeah.
It's just too much input.
Exactly. Your cognitive resources are stretched way too thin.
Oh.
And then, there's also that little voice that starts whispering, like, is this even the most important thing I should be doing right now? That kind of questioning the value of the task can really derail your focus.
Well, for sure. If you're not convinced that what you're working on is important or relevant, it's so much harder to stay engaged.
Absolutely. And finally, the author introduces this really interesting concept called unused attentional space. And I think this one has some pretty profound implications for how we think about focus.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this unused attentional space. What does that look like in our day-to-day lives?
So think of your attention like a container. It has a certain capacity. And if you're doing a task that only requires a fraction of that capacity, something really routine or simple, well, you have all this leftover mental bandwidth. And what happens to that extra space? Your brain, being the, super active organ that it is going to try to fill it. And a lot of times that filling comes in the form of those wandering thoughts, those mental rabbit holes.
So the less demanding the task is, the more likely my mind is to wander.
Exactly.
Okay, so like if I'm doing some data entry, something that's pretty mindless, I'm leaving a lot of space in that attention container for my mind to drift off to, think about weekend plans or that funny meme I saw earlier.
Precisely. Now, the good news is the chapter doesn't just leave us with a diagnosis, it offers some really practical solutions. And one of the most surprising, even paradoxical ideas is this idea of making your work harder. What did you think of that when you first read it?
I'll be honest, my first thought was, wait, are you serious? I'm already juggling a million things.
Hmm.
But as I read on and really dug into the author's reasoning, especially the connection to Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow, it started to make sense.
Right, that state of complete absorption. And what's really cool is how the chapter applies this concept of flow directly to combating mind wandering. So, we talked about how when a task is too easy, boredom sets in and your focus starts to drift. And on the other hand, if a task is overwhelmingly difficult, you get anxious. And again, it's hard to concentrate.
Right, right.
But there's this sweet spot, this challenge level that's just right for your skill set. And that's where flow happens, where you can really achieve hyperfocus.
It's all about finding that balance, right? Being stretched but not overwhelmed so you can get fully immersed in the task. And I love how the author suggests that if you're constantly battling a wandering mind, it might actually be a sign that the work you're doing isn't demanding enough to hold your attention.
It's like your brain is craving a bigger challenge.
Yeah, like it's saying, give me something to really sink my teeth into.
Yeah.
And then the chapter goes into Parkinson's law, this idea that work expands to fill the time available for its completion.
Oh, yeah. I think we've all experienced that. That feeling of a task somehow taking up the entire allotted time, even if it could have been done faster.
Oh, absolutely.
And what I found really insightful is how the author connects this to the idea of not having enough really engaging work. So when you're hyper-focused, you often complete tasks more quickly. But then what happens? That newfound time, if it's not filled with other meaningful work, it tends to get filled with less productive activities. It's like there's this internal pressure to stay busy.
Oh, it's so true. That feeling of needing to look busy even when you've been super productive. I totally relate to that. And the author's anecdote about finishing his book ahead of schedule and then finding all these other little things to fill his time, it really drives that point home.
Yeah, it highlights this really important lesson. Mindless busy work, it's not just a time waster. It can be a symptom of not having enough truly engaging and important tasks to focus on. When you're up against a tight deadline or you have a really complex project, you don't even think about those less important tasks.
Yeah. Because there's just no room for them, right?
Exactly.
So the takeaway here is don't shy away from more complex, challenging work. It might actually be the key to less mind wandering and deeper, more fulfilling engagement.
I like that. Challenge yourself.
Now, the chapter takes a really interesting turn and explores how we can actually increase the size of our attentional space.
Yeah, this is where we go beyond just managing our current attention to actively expanding our cognitive capacity.
Right.
And the author starts by talking about brain training apps, which, they're often hyped up as this quick fix for improving focus and memory. But unfortunately, the research suggests they don't really deliver those lasting real-world benefits.
Yeah, all those promises of boosting your cognitive abilities with a few minutes of games each day. It's tempting, but the chapter suggests those benefits don't really transfer over to our everyday lives.
Exactly. You might get better at the specific tasks in the app, but it doesn't necessarily translate to improved focus in general.
Okay.
However, the chapter then goes on to highlight a set of practices that do have solid evidence behind them for expanding your attentional capacity, meditation, and mindfulness.
Ah, yes, those ancient practices.
Now, I know those words can sometimes evoke images of, monks sitting in silent contemplation, but the author breaks it down in a really accessible way. He explains that at its core, meditation is simply about consistently redirecting your focus back to a chosen anchor, usually your breath.
Okay.
And what I find fascinating is the parallel he draws between meditation and hyperfocus. They both involve this continuous process of noticing when your mind wanders and gently bringing it back.
Right.
In meditation, that act of noticing and redirecting is actually the whole point. And each time you do it, you're strengthening your executive function, that set of cognitive skills that includes controlling your attention.
And the benefits are pretty compelling. The chapter cites studies showing that regular meditation practice can lead to a decrease in mind wandering, increased sustained focus, and even protection against that age-related decline in working memory.
Absolutely. And there's this one study mentioned in the chapter that really blew my mind. It found that people who meditated for just a few weeks experienced an average increase of over 30% in their working memory capacity.
Wow, that's a huge jump.
It is. And think about what that means for your ability to hold and manipulate information, for learning, problem solving, and focusing on complex tasks.
That's a game changer.
Right. And the author emphasizes that you don't need to become a Zen master to see these benefits. Just a few minutes of meditation each day can make a real difference.
Consistency is key, right?
Exactly. It's about establishing that regular habit, even if it's just for a minute or two at a time. And along with meditation, the chapter also highlights mindfulness as another powerful tool for expanding your attentional space.
Now, mindfulness, as I understand it, is similar to meditation, but with a slightly different emphasis.
You got it. Mindfulness is more about cultivating this non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, of what you're experiencing through your senses.
So, like, really paying attention to the sights, sounds, smells, tastes, physical sensations of whatever I'm doing, even something as mundane as taking a shower.
Exactly. The author has this great example in the chapter where he talks about realizing he'd never really paid attention to the act of showering before. And it highlights how often we're just on autopilot, even during these everyday activities.
Oh, I'm totally guilty of that. My mind is often miles away when I'm doing routine things.
Right. So a mindful shower, as the chapter describes, would be about really tuning into the feeling of the water on your skin, the temperature, the sounds, really being present in that moment.
Okay, I can see how that would be a good exercise in mindfulness.
And the key, as with meditation, is when your mind wanders, and it will wander, you gently guide it back to your chosen point of focus. And what's interesting is that the smaller the object of your attention, the more your mind will tend to wander.
Hmm.
But each time you redirect it, you're strengthening that attention muscle.
So it's like a workout for your brain.
Exactly. And the more you practice this, the better you get at focusing in all areas of your life.
And then the chapter wraps up with some really practical advice for overcoming that initial resistance we often feel when we're trying to get into a state of hyperfocus.
Oh, yeah, that inertia. It's a real struggle.
Because sometimes, just getting started feels like the hardest part.
Absolutely. So the author gives us 4 main strategies for dealing with that.
Okay, lay them on me.
The first one is to shrink your desired hyperfocus period.
Okay.
So if the thought of focusing intensely for an hour feels overwhelming, start with something much smaller, like 5 minutes.
Right.
Often, that initial small commitment is enough to get the ball rolling.
It's less intimidating that way. Instead of
Yeah.
feeling daunted by this huge block of focused work, you're just like, okay, I can do 5 minutes.
Exactly. And then often, once you get started, you find it's easier to keep going.
You build momentum.
Right. The second tip is to notice when you say, I don't have time for something.
Oh, yeah.
This is about becoming more aware of how you're actually using your time
Right.
and questioning whether a perceived lack of time is really just a lack of prioritization. He suggests this task swap exercise where you ask yourself, would I have time for this if it were something I really wanted to do?
Like, oh, I don't have time to work on that report, but I definitely have time to scroll through social media for an hour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that kind of self-awareness can be really powerful.
It calls out your BS, right?
It does. The third strategy is to continually practice hyperfocus. Like any skill, the more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Practice makes perfect.
Exactly. So the author suggests trying to incorporate at least one dedicated hyperfocus interval into your day. This helps you get more comfortable working with fewer distractions and start to appreciate those bursts of productivity.
You train your brain to focus.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth tip is crucial. Recharge. Sometimes that resistance isn't just mental. It's a sign that you're physically or mentally fatigued. And pushing yourself to hyperfocus when you're running on empty, it's just not going to work.
You need to listen to your body.
Exactly. Recognizing when you need to step back and recharge, it's essential for maintaining long-term focus and productivity.
So there you have it, a deep dive into Chapter 5 of Hyperfocus, all about making that powerful state a regular part of your life. We explored the main reasons why our minds wander. Stress, boredom, distractions, those nagging personal concerns, questioning the value of our tasks, and that interesting concept of unused attentional space. We also unpacked the idea of actually making your work harder to tap into that flow state and minimize those distractions. Remember, it's all about finding that sweet spot where challenge meets skill. And who knew that tackling more complex tasks could actually help reduce mind wandering? It seems counterintuitive, but makes a lot of sense when you consider how it fills up that attentional space. We also touched on Parkinson's law and how our work can expand to fill the available time, giving us some food for thought about how we manage our time and priorities. Then we delved into the realm of expanding your attentional space, debunking those brain training myths and highlighting the real benefits of meditation and mindfulness. Just a few minutes a day of focusing on your breath or intentionally engaging with the present moment can have a profound impact on your ability to concentrate and even boost your working memory. And finally, we talked about overcoming that initial resistance to hyperfocus with those practical tips about starting small, being mindful of our time, practicing consistently, and taking breaks when needed.
It's a jam-packed chapter.
It is. So much good stuff in there. So which of these strategies resonates most with you? Are you curious about exploring meditation or mindfulness? Are you ready to rethink the complexity of your current tasks? Let us know in the comments what stood out to you in this deep dive. And as you start integrating these ideas into your life, remember that managing your attention, it's really about enhancing the quality of your work and the richness of your experiences.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you to ponder as you reflect on this chapter. Now that you understand the power of filling your attentional space with meaningful work and the potential of practices like meditation and mindfulness to actually expand that space, how might intentionally structuring the complexity of your daily tasks and incorporating brief moments of mindful attention shift your overall sense of accomplishment and engagement? Think about it. Thank you for joining us on Chapters Unfolded for this deep dive into hyperfocus. Until our next chapter, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep focusing on what truly matters.